Hello, I'm Lynn, the Wellbeing Lady, and this week I'm not my normal smiley self. I'm actually feeling a bit grumpy because I've been hearing an awful lot this week about support plans. And I think if I had a pound for every time I heard the word support plan, I think I'd probably have enough money to fund my Costa habits for at least a week, which is a reasonable amount of money. So it's really upsetting me how many people are going through this at the moment. I think part of the issue is not the process itself. That's actually the process sets out to protect both the school and the employee. So actually, the process in itself is not a bad one, but when it's not used correctly and not used well, then it's not good at all. And bottom line is, nobody should be made to feel the way you're feeling if you are on a support plan. It's just not right. To suggest that somebody is not managing or coping in a situation where the bottom line is none of us are managing or coping is ridiculous. And as we know, there are just so many variables. Some people look as if they're coping better than others, appreciate that. But at the same time, I don't know many people who will cope with the pressure that teachers are put under without something giving at some point. And also, I don't really think that schools are very well equipped to deal with people who they consider to be not managing in these situations. There's not enough training for that, for example. Senior leaders just seem to think that they can ban support plans around and then that will improve the whole situation. But actually, it just makes things 10 times worse. Because if you were a person who had everything together before you went on a support plan, when you're on that support plan, you won't have it together. And you'll be crying in the toilet. And no doubt you'll have panic attacks when you've never had a panic attack in your life. It's that sort of situation. If somebody tells you you're not doing your job properly, when you're a diligent hard worker, then that is very difficult. So when I went out for my run this morning, which didn't actually go very well, I had going around my head 150 different feelings about this situation that people are finding themselves in. And having gone through it myself, and I really appreciate how it makes you feel inside, which isn't very good at all. And you are more than that feeling. If you were plucked out and put in a completely different environment, then you would thrive. And that is the bottom line, isn't it? It's the environmental factors that are inhibiting you from doing a job well, whether that be you've got no LSA, and you should have an LSA. Maybe you've got 5 children in your class who have behavioural issues who bounce off each other and you can't do anything about it. Maybe your differentiation is challenging because you've got a range of about 3 years attainment in your class. You add all these things together. I'm not entirely sure how any normal human being would supposedly be able to cope with this. And then on top of that, you add all the paperwork and all those other things you have to do and all the work you do in your own time, then something's going to give and it's going to be you. So I just thought I'd put this clip together to first of all, just show some solidarity really, and just tell you to try and look objectively at the situation because it's not you, it's going to be them. And whatever situation you find yourself in, it might feel awful at the moment, but once it's all sorted out, then you'll be able to look at it in the past a bit more objectively and realise actually it wasn't as bad as you thought at the time, which is really important. This process is not the end of the world. It is horrible, horrible process, but it's not the end of the world. So I'd put that out there straight away and attempt to dispel just a couple of the myths surrounding support plans for you. So having gone through this myself, I made sure that I looked on the union website to start with, just to check all those guidelines that schools should be following in order for them to do this procedure correctly, because an awful lot of schools do not do the procedure correctly to start with. So that's an interesting thing to start with, isn't it? So as soon as anyone says the words informal capability or support plan to you, then it's time to sit up and notice. I think an issue here is because it's called a support plan, that means that people are not necessarily thinking it's as serious as it could be. So the worst case scenario is a support plan will end up with formal capability. Best case scenario, your support plan will just be a few targets for you to meet, and then everything can go on as you were you can enjoy your job again and get on with your life. You know, that'd be brilliant, wouldn't it? But I think because the language around this has become so informal, I think half the time people don't even really realise that they're on it, because if SLT said, oh, I've got a support plan to help you, you're like, oh, okay, thank you very much. I'll take those targets, I'll work on those, and we'll see what happens. But you don't necessarily associate the word support plan with informal capability. So if this happens to you, just make sure it's really clear and you get it really explicitly made to you that it is informal capability and not just a few targets. So that's the first thing. Right, so here we have the NEU guidance for capability procedures. So just going to go back through this for you, and it can be easily found on their website as well. So first of all, any hints of any sort of support plan or capability, you should be advised of your right to be accompanied by a colleague or trade union representative. So I would always advise you at this point to get on the phone straight away to your union and see if they can come out. Now, I've found in the past from personal experience that if the union are able to get on board at this point, then it just shows school that you're not messing around either, and that you're taking this seriously and you mean business. Because, you know, whether you agree with what they're saying about you or not, it's always good to have that third party there to support you. And my union representative was really helpful. And, you know, at the end, I was just like, so do you think it's me? And, you know, you can probably guess what she said. So don't need to say much more than that there, really. So you should be informed if a note taker, a witness or a personnel officer will attend the meeting, and it's always good to have somebody there to take minutes, a third party who is not going to be anything to do with the situation. So normally somebody from HR do this, or from a smaller school, it might be and someone from the office, which isn't always that nice, because actually they're not as detached from the situation you'd like them to be. But it's really important to have that person there taking the notes as well. You can be accompanied by a colleague, but for me, it's tricky to put a colleague in that situation to start with. And at the same time, it's tricky for the colleague to be neutral as well sometimes. So I probably err on the side of trade union representative if you can get somebody in, but definitely take someone. So what should I do once I'm on the capability procedures? So first of all there, just assume you're on it. As soon as the word support plan comes out, just assume you're on the beginnings of the capability procedures. The union recommends that you take the following steps, even if your performance is being monitored on an informal basis. Seek the union representation as soon as possible if you've not already done so, and they're happy to have a chat with you. Even if they have a chat with you and they don't need to do anything else, then they're always happy to listen. And that really is what you pay your union fees for, isn't it? So please use them as much as you can. Ask that matters discussed in every meeting be confirmed in writing, really important, and check what they have discussed that you agree with it as well. Ask observers to provide feedback after every lesson observed. Keep a record of the number of drop-ins and observations that take place during your review period. And also, if you are somebody who's not always in class, so if you're an out of class, like a Senko or something like that, then make sure that you keep records of what you plan to do in the week and what actually happened, because actually sometimes people are suggesting you're not doing your job, but they don't see all the other things that crop up in the way. So if you can account for the whole of your time, then really they can't really argue with that, can they? I mean, they can say, can you please do this rather than this, which is fine. That's what your line manager might do anyway, and that's a fair comment. But there's only so many hours in the day and you can't do everything. So if you don't have this information, ask for your pupil progress data for the last academic year as compared with other classes in your key stage. So data is, really subjective, because actually, as well as I do, that data from the previous teacher might not be as accurate as it could be. And sometimes you're landed with a pile of fantastic data that you're meant to then move on. And you can't really get around that without dropping the last teacher in, or at least suggesting that they're not very good at assessing. So it's important to get this the data and look at the data, but at the same time, it never tells the whole story. Ask whether your employer has equality impact assess the capability procedure, and if so, whether you can have a copy of the results. Now, I'm not really entirely sure what that involves, but I'm guessing that someone in HR should know, and also, of course, your union rep will know about that as well. Take up any offer to contact your employer's counselling service. So yeah, get on board to start with. My employer's counselling services were not suitable for my needs because they were more like short-term action planning. I can do that myself. So actually, I didn't feel that that was beneficial to me. But if they offer it, take it up, because they also need to show that they are on board with supporting you, and you need to show that you're on board with attempting to be supported as well, even if the bottom line is you're not interested. Seek GP advice. The stress of capability is likely to give rise to ill health. Your GP may be able to recommend coping strategies. Now, this is a very wide area, because not only will your GP recommend coping strategies, but your GP will also be pretty sympathetic and will have the power to give you some thinking space to sign you off sick for a little bit of time while you sort this out. They are really, really good GPs. So I've never heard of anybody that's had an issue being signed off. That is not to say it's not a horrible situation. And before this happened to me, I've never been signed off in my life. So it's a really big thing for me and other people to be signed off with stress when it's the job that's causing the problem and it's not you. So, but it's a service that's there to be used. So please utilise that. So another thing to mention is lesson observations. There are so many reasons, some of them made up and some of them actual, why you may have a bad lesson observation, which then leads to this process. So, maybe you've got something in your personal life that's causing you to have a few more issues concentrating on what you're doing. This is fair enough, we're all human beings. And perhaps that's impacting your performance in the classroom. I mean, if something serious happens at home and you're having to deal with it, you wouldn't have those difficulties. Or, for example, after years of fantastic lessons, you're suddenly deemed no good for whatever reason. And what is that all about? Because sometimes there's not even a very good reason why this has happened. Maybe you're struggling with a particular class and you just need more support with behaviour, which you're just not getting. And then they've decided that actually, rather than giving you support, they're going to do a support plan instead. So we all know that lesson observations are seriously subjective, and we also know that even the teachers who are consistently fantastic teachers, they all have their off days. And I think over the past 20 years I've had some fantastic lessons and I've had some real shockers, and it's the ones where you think to yourself, or say to a colleague afterwards, well, I'm glad nobody watched me teach that one because it was pretty awful. We've all had those days. So the more lessons that are watched, the more holes that will be found in lessons. So if your school is a school that has a lot of scrutiny, then it's likely there'll be more holes. And it's just the way it is, isn't it? Everything, the more you look, the more you'll find. And if you end up having increased observations due to this support plan, I fail to see how anybody could manage to be really good at teaching in front of people watching them all the time. I mean, you're not a performing monkey, are you? You are a human being. So with that level of people watching you the whole time, just waiting for you to slip up, it's just not a very fun experience and very stressful to add on top of your already big stress with these targets you've got. So I would just think about whether you've got records, first of all, of previous observations that have been fine, whether you've got records of emails you've sent asking for support. So, for example, if you feel that you've got a problem with particular children in your class, you have behavioural needs, have you accessed support or asked for support for somebody to come and show you some new strategies? Any evidence on email, it's going to be fantastic. So go back through your emails and just have a look to see what you've requested and what you've raised. It's always good to have everything in writing. So the NEU have got very strict guidelines on lesson observations, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of schools don't stick to that. So I'm just going to look over here while I read it directly from their website. conducting observations. There should be a limit to 3 observations for all purposes. Under no circumstances shall the total time occupied by all observations exceed 3 hours per year, and the focus and timing must be agreed in the teacher's appraisal planning statement. So looking at that statement, which is also highlighted in purple on their website, I'm not convinced that that is generally followed. If you think about the amount of learning walks that you get, the amount of observations, the amount of, just people walking through and suggesting things, it's a bit of a grey area between what constitutes an official observation and what doesn't. And a lot of schools try and get around it by doing a lot more learning walks rather than calling them observations. So you do have to be a bit wary of that. But just write down every time they come and see you, write down the time, write down how long they've stayed, and any suggestions that they give you as well. Just keep records of everything, because that will help your union rep as well when it comes to it. I'm also going to read a bit on classroom observation and formal capability procedures. So it says, for teachers on a formal capability procedure, an important part of the support offered to the teacher will be clearly defined amount of classroom observation with structured and oral and written feedback. The amount of classroom observation will be discussed with the teacher and their union representative who is supporting and advising them in the formal process. So make sure that that actually happens for you. So at this point, you will hopefully have taken advice from your union rep. You'll hopefully have considered seeing your GP to support you as well. You'll hopefully have a slightly more objective view of your situation. I would also recommend just considering previous PMRs that you've had. Has there been any consideration that there's been an issue previously? Has this just come out of the blue as a knee-jerk reaction about something that's happened? All this is really, really good evidence for you. So I'd also say that if you have an inkling that this whole situation can turn sour very quickly, and you're thinking that there's no way that this situation is salvageable, so maybe you have now lost any respect you had for your leadership team and your school, whereas before it was all fine. Personally, I'm not sure that even if I had the situation, I came out of it the other end really well, I'm not sure that working there would be quite the same again. And I think I'd probably be able to thrive better in a different environment. But this is for you to decide. It's not for anybody else to decide. So it's up to you whether you want to run with this support plan and see what happens, or whether you get the hell out of there, basically. So you need to decide on your individual situation. And if you want to talk over that individual situation with me, please PM me and we can have a chat about it, an objective chat about what might be best. But also your union rep will be able to advise you under the circumstances, your individual circumstances, the best course of action for you. So please use them. So let's see, for example, if you have got to the situation where you have decided that your informal capability proceedings are not going too well, and perhaps they've set you some targets, and perhaps those targets are not binary targets. So, for example, you might have one that, it's somebody's opinion whether you have managed to achieve it or not. Unless your targets are 100% binary yes/no targets, then you can easily prove that you have managed to do them really well. Then there's always a point at the next capability meeting where it could turn into formal capability. There's always a hole. So somebody could find a hole in it. Again, it will depend on your individual situation, depend on whether your school are actually out to support you, or if they're not. Increasingly, unfortunately, there's a lot of schools who are not actually really interested in supporting people, particularly if they're quite expensive. So it's a bit of a sad situation, but true. But if there's any inkling that you might end up in a meeting about capability that turns into formal capability, you don't want to be in that position. You will want to get out of there as soon as possible, I think. Obviously, it would always be your decision. but that is a consideration. You do not want it going to formal capability. If, for example, you carried on for a few weeks trying to meet your targets, and then suddenly you felt like the world was caving in and it all got on top of you and it was very difficult, and then you went to see your GP and your GP agreed that it was a very difficult time for you at the moment and you got signed off for a period of time, then I would always recommend getting occupational health involved. So your HR department will probably recommend themselves that HR get involved, but if they don't, please request them, because they are very, very helpful. They can talk through all of your issues with the school and any personal issues you might have, and they can make recommendations. Now, they might recommend, or it's quite likely they'll recommend, that the school needs to do several things before you go back, such as complete the stress risk assessment or have a reduced timetable, etc., etc. So they can suggest things that the school have to put in place for you to go back. And also the evidence that they use can support you if you go back to your GP and need to be signed off for a bit longer. So I would say always go with the suggestion that to see occupational health. Don't look at it as something to worry about, because it's actually a really positive experience. If you get to the point as well when you feel that you don't want to walk back in that building, so maybe you've been off with stress and anxiety for a month and they invite you in for a meeting to discuss it. I heard this week of somebody having a meeting in their house, which is really inappropriate. So the senior leadership team wanted to come to her house even though she's off sick and wanted to hold a meeting there with the lady. No, that's not right. So it should be on neutral territory. But you don't have to go to that meeting because you are sick. You are too sick to attend that meeting. Why put yourself through that stress? You know, if you had a broken leg, they would not ask you to come and attend a meeting about your broken leg. So why is it okay then, if you're off with stress and anxiety, why is it then okay to add to your stress and anxiety to ask you to come in for a meeting? So I would decline the meeting. If necessary, your union rep can go in your place and speak on your behalf, and that's another option. But decline the meeting, go back to your union and make sure that you just see what they suggest. And it might be that they suggest that they wade in a bit more and get you out of there. So that would be good, wouldn't it? So you can actually think about what you want to do next. And once your union have waded in to get you out of there, make sure that you also, once you agree to any terms and conditions that come up, get an agreed reference. So this means that your last employer will have to have a reference that's agreed with the union for you to take to your next employment, because it's not fair that you have a bad reference because of the situation that you are in that has been done to you by your employers. So it's really good to have an agreed reference, and then you don't have to worry about getting another job. You can just sit back and relax for a bit, take stock of everything, support your mental health, and then once you're feeling better, then go and get yourself another job. So you might also have to question about your capability being mentioned in any future reference, and this is why it's really important to get that agreed reference, because if you ended up, worst case scenario, on capability, then your school would be obliged basically to tell your new employer. And as a new employer, if I was employing somebody, I don't know, I might if I knew the whole story, but I'm not sure if I would take the chance on somebody who had this on their record in comparison to the same person who did not have it on their record. So that is the bottom line, isn't it? So hopefully you expect your next employer to be able to overlook the difficulties that you have had, but at the same time, if you were employing people, then you would have to consider very carefully whether to take a chance on somebody with capability on their record. Hopefully, increasingly, this wouldn't happen so much, but you don't really want to get yourself in this situation. So if you work in a maintained school, so a community school, and apply at some future date to work at a different maintained school or an academy, your school will be under a legal obligation, if asked to do so, to tell your prospective employer if you have been the subject of capability proceedings in the past 2 years. So you really don't want that on your record for 2 years. Your school will also be required to provide written details of their concerns, which gave rise to the capability of proceedings, duration of the proceedings, the outcome, even if you currently work in a non-maintained school, so an academy, free school or sixth form college, your school may disclose matters relating to your capability in references, though they must be careful not to breach confidentiality or data protection principles when doing so. And with any situation, if you didn't have an agreed reference behind you, sometimes it's what schools don't say, not what they do say in a reference. So, if there's glaring gaps in anything, then that's also causes alarm bells to future employers. So, preventing this situation and getting a clean reference and agreed reference alongside your union is the best thing you can do. So I hope that has been helpful. Please feel free to reach out to me if I can be of any further support about anything. This is just a bit about the Wellbeing Lady and what I'll be offering currently and in the future. So lots of coaching stuff. Hopefully we'll be offering wellbeing packages at some point to school, also SEND support because I am a SENCO, lots of stuff on my website, which is also a blog, so loads of information on there as well. And you're probably already seeing this in the Coaching for Teacher Wellbeing group, but if you're not in that already, come and have a look at that, where I'm putting up lots and lots of future content. So, goes to me to say, enjoy the rest of your day. But obviously, if you are in the thick of this, then you probably won't enjoy the rest of your day. And you probably won't enjoy any days until you are well and truly out of it. So, best of luck on your journey. And believe me, I know how horrible this can make you feel. And I really empathise for your situation. But I've been through it. I've come out the other end shining. So, please make sure this is not something that is going to define you. This is something that you'll get through and be stronger for it. So thanks for listening, and I hope it helped.